Have you ever been the family ATM for years? I was. I paid my sister's rent, her bills, her everything. But the moment I said no was the moment I went from being their daughter to their target. It started with an insult and ended with a police report and a life they could only dream of. This story is about drawing a line in the sand. If you've ever had to fight for your own respect, hit that subscribe button, because this is for you. The worn leather of the steering wheel felt unnervingly familiar under my palms, slick with a decade of use and memories. It was the same wheel I'd gripped white-knuckled during my driver's test. The same one I'd leaned my forehead against while sobbing over my first high school breakup. Now, it was just guiding me back to the source of a different, more chronic kind of anxiety. The evening sun, low and golden, filtered through the canopy of ancient oaks lining the streets of suburban Columbus. Each house I passed was a ghost of my childhood, Mrs. Gable's prize-winning roses, the Hendersons' perpetually broken basketball hoop, the driveway where I first learned to ride a bike. It was all so painfully, suffocatingly the same. Tonight was my mother's 50th birthday. I chanted that phrase internally, a flimsy shield against the inevitable confrontation I knew was waiting. Just get through tonight. It's for Mom. Her 50th. Just smile, nod, and get out before the damage is done. It was a simple goal, but in the ecosystem of my family, simplicity was a foreign concept. As I pulled into the driveway, the house stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the living room lights. It looked like a postcard for the American dream. All white siding and a neatly manicured lawn my father was obsessively proud of. But I knew better. I knew that inside that picture-perfect frame, the air was thick with unspoken resentments and carefully polished grievances. Taking a long, slow breath, I killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, amplifying the nervous thumping in my own chest. A familiar scent, my mother's signature rosemary roast chicken and garlic bread, drifted from the house for a single, treacherous second. It pulled me back to a handful of genuinely happy memories, moments of warmth that felt like they belonged to a different family, a different lifetime. The nostalgia was a trap. I reminded myself, a sweet poison. I pushed the feeling down and opened the car door. My mother, Helen, must have been watching from the window, because the front door swung open before my feet even touched the porch steps. Her smile was a bright, brave thing, but it didn't quite have the strength to reach her eyes. The faint lines of exhaustion etched around them told a truer story, the silent testament of a lifetime spent as the designated peacekeeper in a war she could never win. Andrea? Honey, you made it, she said, her voice a little too bright. She pulled me into a hug that felt less like a greeting and more like she was bracing herself. I hugged her back, feeling the delicate bones in her shoulders. Of course, Mom, I wouldn't miss this for the world. Inside, the dining room was a stage set for a perfect family gathering. Helen had pulled out all the stops, the good china with the little blue flowers she adored, the heavy silver that was a wedding gift, and the crystal glasses that only saw the light of day on major holidays. A dozen tapered candles flickered in their holders, their flames dancing and casting long, wavering shadows on the walls, making the room feel both intimate and unsettling. My father, Richard, was holding court at the head of the table, his voice a low rumble. My younger sister, Jessica, sat to his right, wrapped, with a few cousins scattered around them, looking vaguely uncomfortable. For the first 20 minutes, a fragile truce held, We exchanged the usual pleasantries, our words carefully chosen to skim across safe, shallow topics. The weather had been unusually mild. The Buckeyes were having a great season. My cousin Sarah's new baby was finally sleeping through the night. I presented my mother with her gift. A cashmere shawl in a deep shade of sapphire blue that I knew would bring out the color in her eyes. She gasped as she unwrapped it, her fingers sinking into the impossibly soft fabric. "Oh, Andrea, it's absolutely beautiful," she breathed, draping it over her shoulders. "You really shouldn't have. You deserve it. Mom, happy birthday." My father grunted from his end of the table, a sound that could have been interpreted as approval. "Nice. You're putting that corporate salary to good use." "I see." There it was. The first jab, subtle enough to be denied. But I felt it all the same. I just smiled weakly and took my seat. The meal began, and the conversation flowed around me, mostly directed by my father. He had a way of steering every topic, every anecdote, back to his favorite subject, Jessica. "Speaking of deserving things," he began, his voice booming with pride as he set down his wine glass. "Jessica just landed the lead role in her university's production of The Glass Menagerie, on top of her double major in art history and French literature. Mind you, the girl's a powerhouse, a true free spirit, not afraid to chase her passions instead of a paycheck." He cast a significant look down the table at me. The comparison didn't need to be spoken aloud. It hung there, thick and heavy in the candlelight. My job, as a senior marketing analyst for a national retail corporation, was practical. It was secure. It paid well enough for me to own my own apartment, drive a reliable car, and buy my mother cashmere shawls. But in his eyes, it was a failure of imagination. A life lived in a cubicle, quantified by spreadsheets and profit margins. It was a monument to a life played too safely. I felt the familiar, acidic knot tighten in my stomach. I focused on the intricate dance of cutting my chicken into perfectly even, unnecessarily small pieces. The scraping of my knife against the china was the only sound I trusted myself to make. Across the table, I saw Jessica dip her head in a perfect performance of blushing humility. But I didn't miss the flicker of a triumphant smirk she hid behind her napkin. My mother shot me that quick, pained, apologetic glance. The look that said, "Please, Andrea, just let it go. For me." And so I did. I chewed my food, which now tasted like cardboard. And I listened. I listened to my father recount every single one of Jessica's recent triumphs with the fervor of a sports announcer. How her art professor had called her latest painting transcendent, how she was single-handedly organizing a campus charity drive to save the local animal shelter. Each word was a carefully polished stone, thrown not to celebrate one daughter, but to diminish the other. Then, the spotlight swung to me. The shift was so abrupt, it gave me conversational whiplash. My father cleared his throat, adopting the tone he used for serious, fatherly pronouncements. "So, Andrea," he said, pinning me with his gaze, "on the subject of family support, have you been taking care of your sister properly?" The question, phrased like a performance review, sucked the air from my lungs. Taking care of her, I was her entire financial infrastructure. I paid her $2,000 monthly rent for a trendy downtown apartment. He'd insisted she needed to be near the art scene. I paid her cell phone bill. I sent an extra $500 every month for groceries and utilities. A slush fund I knew was more likely spent on vintage clothes and overpriced cocktails. But before I could articulate any of this, my father turned to the star of the show. Jessica, honey, tell me, has your sister been helping you out? Jessica, ever the actress, put down her fork and delicately dabbed her lips with her napkin. She let the silence stretch. A dramatic pause to ensure she had the full attention of her audience. Andrea has been a help, she said, her voice a soft, fragile thing, with the rent and all. And I'm grateful. But, she sighed. Aviri. Put upon sound. It's just so hard to get between my classes and my part-time job at the gallery. The bus is so unreliable. I've been thinking, what I really, truly need is a car. The room fell utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hiss and pop of the candle wicks. A car. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes on me, waiting, expecting me to pull out my checkbook. I slowly, deliberately, placed my fork and knife together on my plate. My appetite and my patience were completely gone. I lifted my head and looked not at Jessica, but directly at my father. If she needs a car, I asked, my voice dangerously calm and level. Why don't you buy her one? The change was like a switch being flipped. The mask of the benevolent patriarch dissolved, revealing the furious tyrant beneath. A dark, mottled flush crept up my father's neck and consumed his face. He slammed his open palm flat on the dining table. The heavy oak shuddered. The silverware jumped. The wine sloshed violently in the crystal glasses, and my mother let out a tiny, terrified squeak. Don't you dare use that tone with me, he roared, the sudden volume making me flinch. Jessica has potential real. Artistic potential that this family needs to nurture, she needs to be invested in. You have a stable corporate job. You have a savings account. It is your responsibility to help your family. My God. Andrea, can't you stop being so damn selfish for once in your life? The argument devolved from there. I tried to reason with him, to explain that my savings account was for a down payment on a house, for my retirement, for my own life. But every word I spoke was twisted, reframed as evidence of my selfishness, my cold heart, my lack of family loyalty. The cousins suddenly found the patterns on their plates fascinating. They shrank in their chairs, desperate to become invisible. My mother just sat there, frozen, her face pale and slack, the beautiful blue shawl around her shoulders looking like a lead weight. Finally, my father had had enough of my quiet defiance. He shoved his chair back, the legs screaming in protest against the hardwood floor. He stood up, leaning over the table, his knuckles white where he gripped its edge. His face was a mask of pure contempt. You don't get it, do you? He spat, his voice dropping to a low, vicious snarl. Your sister is better than you in every single way. She always has been. And she always will be. And that was it. That was the moment, the final thread of hope. The one I hadn't even realized I was still clinging to, finally snapped. The years of being second best, of my achievements being minimized while Jessica's were magnified, of feeling like an ATM with a name, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of clarity. But I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy or humor. It was a sharp, brittle, unfamiliar sound that came from deep within my chest. It was the sound of something breaking free. It cut through his rage and hung in the stunned, candlelit silence of the room. I looked my father directly in the eye. My own expression now as cold and hard as his. Fine, I said, my voice perfectly clear and steady. You're absolutely right. She's so much better. In that case, starting next month, she can use her superior talents to pay her own damn rent. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than before. Jessica's practiced. Delicate smile froze on her face and then crumbled. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. My father just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish, his face a swirling vortex of shock and incandescent fury. He pointed a trembling finger toward the door. Get out, he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Then, he found his full volume again. A roar that shook the room. Get out of my house now. I stood up slowly, deliberately placing my napkin beside my untouched plate of food. I walked to the hall closet and retrieved my coat, shrugging it on with a calm that felt utterly alien and deeply powerful. I turned back one last time to the horrified faces around the table, my gaze landing on my mother, who looked like she was about to shatter. Happy birthday, Mom, I said, and my voice was surprisingly gentle. And then I turned and walked out, closing the door quietly behind me, leaving the wreckage of their perfect family dinner and my old life behind me in the dark. The cold night air hit my face like a slap, shocking the breath from my lungs. I stood on the porch for a moment, the sound of the front door clicking shut behind me as final as a gavel. The sounds of the party inside were instantly muffled, distant, as if happening in another world. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just stood there, my car keys digging into the palm of my hand, and stared into the quiet darkness of the suburban street. There were no tears. The searing rage and the profound, bottomless hurt were too immense for tears. They had burned past that, crystallizing into something else inside me, something hard and dangerously clear. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. The familiar streets were just abstract shapes of light and shadow. My mind, however, was working with a terrifying lucidity. Every condescending word, every dismissive glance, every dollar I had ever given them played back in a silent, high-speed montage. It wasn't just the argument tonight. It was a lifetime of this. A lifetime of being the reliable, responsible bedrock, while Jessica was the beautiful, delicate sculpture they placed on top of it. I had been a foundation, meant to be solid, functional, and completely unseen. When I reached my apartment, a small but quiet sanctuary that I had paid for with my own hard work, I moved with a strange, robotic calm. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, hung my coat in the closet, and walked straight to my laptop on the desk. I didn't turn on the lights. The glow from the screen was all I needed. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my muscles remembering the login information for the joint bank account my father had insisted I open 6 months ago. It's just easier this way, Andy, he had said, his voice oozing with paternal wisdom. This way, we can all see what Jess needs, and I can help you manage it. Family has to be transparent. We have to trust each other. Trust. The word tasted like poison in my mouth now. The banking portal loaded, and the screen filled with a list of transactions. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I started to scroll. There were the monthly $2,000 rent payments, as expected, but then I saw the other things. A $400 charge from Sephora, a $700 charge from Nordstrom, with the memo "New Season Wardrobe for Jess," Then there were the cash withdrawals. $500 here. $300 there. All from an ATM near my father's golf club. And then I saw it. The transaction that made the cold clarity inside me ignite into a white-hot, silent rage, a charge for $1,200 from a luxury spa resort, 2 hours away. The memo. In my father's telltale blocky typing, read Jess needed a relaxation weekend. I scrolled back. Month after month. It was a systematic, calculated pillaging of my account. The $10,000 I had mentally noted was a wild understatement. Looking at the balance, I realized it was closer to $15,000 gone. Vanished into a black hole of my sister's entitlement and my father's gross negligence. They hadn't just been taking the money I offered, they had been helping themselves to a buffet, treating my hard-earned savings like their personal expense account. The nausea was immediate and overwhelming. I leaned back in my chair. The memory of my father's words at the bank, "We have to trust each other," echoing in the silent, empty room. My paralysis lasted only a moment. Then, the ice returned, colder and sharper than before. I clicked on the transfer funds button. There was a little over $5,000 left. With steady fingers, I typed in the full amount, selected my personal, private checking account as the destination, and hit confirm. I watched the screen as the balance of the joint account dropped to 0. Then, I navigated to the account settings. I found the link I was looking for, "Close this account." A pop-up appeared. "Are you sure this action is permanent and cannot be undone?" A grim smile touched my lips. I clicked yes. A final confirmation screen appeared. The account was closed. The link was severed. It felt like I had just amputated a gangrenous limb. A profound, shuddering sense of relief washed over me. So potent it left me lightheaded. The next morning, the first call came, right on schedule. I was sipping my first cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the city, when my phone buzzed with Jessica's name and a selfie of her pouting artfully. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Andrea," her voice was a frantic whine. "My landlord just called. My rent payment was declined. Did you forget to make the transfer?" "No, I didn't forget," I said, my voice as calm and cool as the morning air. What happened? The money's not there. I need you to fix this. Andrea. The late fee is $100. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Dad said you're better than me in every way. Remember, I'm sure someone with your transcendent potential will be able to figure it out. I hung up before she could respond. The sound of her sputtering indignation cut short. I then blocked her number. One down. A few hours later, my mother called. Her voice was strained, laced with a forced, placating tone. "Andrea. Honey. Your father is, well, he's furious. Jessica is hysterical. Now, this has all gone far enough. You need to call your sister. Apologize. And fix this rent situation. Just make it go back to the way it was." "The way it was?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You mean the way it was when Dad was stealing thousands of dollars from my bank account, that way?" There was a pause. "He was just managing things for your sister," she said weakly. "You know how she is. Andrea, please, don't make this harder. For the sake of the family." "No," I said. The word simple and absolute. "I'm done fixing everyone's mistakes. This is not my mess." I ended the call and blocked her number too. The silence in my apartment felt clean, pure. A few days of blessed quiet passed. I threw myself into my work. The clean logic of data and marketing campaigns, a welcome antidote to my family's chaos. But on Saturday, I needed to pick up some old winter clothes from a storage unit in my parents' garage. I drove over in the middle of the day, hoping they'd be out. The house was quiet, but as I pulled up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, parked on the front lawn, was my old 2012 Honda Civic. It was the first car I ever bought. Purchased with 2 years of saved tips from a waitressing job in college. It represented my first taste of real freedom, and stuck under its windshield wiper was a large, handwritten for sale sign, with my father's cell phone number scrawled at the bottom. Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through me. I got out of my car, walked across the lawn, and ripped the sign from under the wiper, tearing it in half. The front door of the house flew open. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard bellowed, storming onto the porch. "This is my car," I said, my voice shaking slightly with fury. "You have no right to sell it." "You abandoned it here," he yelled, his face turning that familiar shade of purple. "You walked out on this family. Anything you leave behind is mine to do with as I please." I didn't argue. I didn't scream back. I walked to the driver's side door, unlocked it with my spare key, and got in. The engine turned over with a familiar, comforting rumble. I put the car in reverse, my father still shouting obscenities from the lawn, and I drove my first taste of freedom right out of his life for good. The final violation came the following weekend. I had been sent on a 2-day business trip to Chicago. I came back Sunday evening, exhausted and ready for a quiet night. I put my key in the lock of my apartment door and felt a jolt of unease. It turned with no resistance. It was already unlocked, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pushed the door open. The living room was in disarray, but it wasn't a messy kind of disarray. It was an empty kind. The 65-inch television was gone from the wall, leaving a ghostly rectangle of lighter-colored paint and a tangle of dangling cables. My laptop was gone from my desk. I ran to my bedroom. The drawers of my jewelry box were open and empty. My collection of watches, which I'd spent years curating, was gone. They'd even gone through my closet, taking my designer purses and a few expensive dresses. There were no signs of a break-in, no shattered window, no splintered door frame. It was a clean job. A job done by someone who had a key, and only 2 people had a spare key to my apartment, my mother and my father. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline making my vision swim. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I unblocked my father's number and hit dial. He answered on the second ring, his voice infuriatingly calm. "Hello, Andrea." "You robbed me," I said, my voice a choked whisper. "You came into my home and you stole my things." There was a soft chuckle on the other end of the line. "Don't be so dramatic. Your sister was a little short on cash after her housing situation changed. She needed a few things to get started, to sell for some capital. Family is about sharing. Andrea, you should be happy to help." The shaking stopped. A profound, terrifying calm washed over me, pushing out the panic and the rage. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. In that moment, I saw my father not as a parent, but as a stranger, an enemy who had crossed a line from which there was no return. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly even, devoid of any emotion at all. "You just made a very, very big mistake." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I sat down at my desk, in front of the empty space where my laptop used to be, and pulled my work phone from my bag. I opened the browser, and with fingers that were now perfectly steady, I typed a new search query into the engine: Best Civil Litigation Lawyer, Columbus, Ohio. The search query glowed on my work phone's screen, a stark white beacon in the deepening gloom of my ransacked apartment. Best Civil Litigation Lawyer, Columbus, Ohio. The words felt foreign, clinical, like something from a television drama. But this was my life now. It was a place of police reports and stolen property and the cold, hard language of the law. I scrolled through the results, past the flashy ads with smiling, predatory faces, until I found a name that felt different: Davis and Sterling. The firm's website was minimalist, professional, and their senior partner, a woman named Eleanor Davis, had a biography filled with phrases like tenacious advocacy and complex financial disputes. I didn't need a friend. I needed a weapon. I booked a consultation for the following afternoon. Walking into the law office the next day felt like crossing into another dimension. The lobby was a cool, quiet space of glass, steel, and dark wood, with a panoramic view of the downtown skyline. It was a world away from the suffocating, floral wallpapered drama of my parents' house. Everything here was about order, logic, and consequence. I clutched a heavy manila folder to my chest, my heart a nervous, fluttering bird against my ribs. Inside was my entire case, meticulously organized. Printed bank statements from the joint account, with every unauthorized transaction highlighted in yellow. Scanned copies of receipts for the television, the laptop, the watches, before and after photos of my apartment, printed in high-resolution color. It was the physical manifestation of my family's betrayal. I was led into a conference room where Eleanor Davis was waiting. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, and her handshake was firm and dry. There was no condescending sympathy in her demeanor, just a crisp, focused professionalism that I found instantly reassuring. "Ms. Ole Edwards," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming in. Your call was intriguing. Please, tell me what's happened." For the next hour, I laid it all out. I started with the dinner, the calculated insults, the demand for a car. I moved on to the discovery of the drained bank account. And finally, the robbery. I spoke in a low, even tone, forcing the emotion out of my voice, presenting the facts as clearly as I could. As I talked, I laid the documents from my folder onto the polished surface of the table, one by one, like a dealer laying out a winning hand in a high-stakes card game. "Mrs. Davis listened without interruption, her gaze fixed on me. She occasionally made a note on a legal pad, her pen scratching softly in the quiet room. When I finished, she spent several long minutes examining the evidence. She put on a pair of sleek, black-framed reading glasses and studied the bank statements, her expression shifting from neutral curiosity to a grim, focused intensity. She tapped a finger on the $1,200 charge from the spa. Finally, she took off her glasses and folded her hands on the table. She looked me directly in the eye. "Ms. Edwards," she began, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Let me be perfectly clear. This is not a family squabble over borrowed items. This is not a misunderstanding. Based on the evidence you have provided me, this is a clear-cut case of systematic financial abuse and grand theft. The items taken from your apartment alone easily push this into felony territory. Hearing a legal expert validate my reality. To give my pain a name like grand theft was like a dam breaking inside me. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes. The first threat of tears in days. But I blinked them back ferociously. I would not cry. Not here. So, what can I do? I asked. My voice a little hoarse. We have several options, she said, leaning forward. We can proceed directly to filing a civil suit for the recovery of your assets and damages. We can also file a police report, which could lead to criminal charges against your father. However, she paused, her gaze shrewd. Given the family dynamic, I'd like to propose a more direct initial strategy, a formal ultimatum. The plan she laid out was simple, elegant, and ruthless. We would give my father one chance, and one chance only, to make this right without involving the courts. It would be a calculated move, designed to apply the maximum possible psychological pressure. You will call him, she explained. You will state the facts clearly, and you will give him a non-negotiable deadline to return the full value of the stolen money and property. It's crucial that this call is recorded. Is that legal? I asked. Ohio is a one-party consent state, she replied with a thin smile. As long as you are a party to the conversation and you consent to the recording, it is perfectly legal and admissible as evidence. Do you feel you can make that call? I thought of my father's smug, dismissive laugh on the phone. I thought of my empty jewelry box. Yes, I said, my voice hard as stone. I can make the call. I left her office an hour later with a clear plan of action and a renewed sense of purpose. The fear and helplessness that had been gnawing at me were gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. That evening, I prepared for battle. I downloaded a call recording app to my phone and tested it multiple times. I sat at my desk and wrote out a short script on a notepad. Bullet points of the exact phrases I needed to use. I calculated the total value of everything, from the $15,000 taken from my account to the $18,500 in stolen property. The final number was staggering. $33,500. The next afternoon, I sat in my quiet apartment, the script in front of me. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I took a deep breath, activated the recording app, and dialed my father's number. He answered on the third ring. What do you want? Andrea, he contou. No warmth in his voice. Hello, Richard, I said, purposefully using his first name. It was a small act of defiance, a refusal to grant him the title of Dad. I am calling to formally inform you of the situation. You have illegally withdrawn approximately $15,000 from our joint bank account for non-approved expenses. And you have stolen property from my apartment with an estimated value of $18,500. There was a snort of derisive laughter from his end. Oh, here we go. Don't be so dramatic. It's family money. You're being hysterical. This is not a negotiation, I continued, my voice a flat monotone. Ignoring his bait. I am giving you 72 hours to transfer the full amount of $33,500 into my personal checking account. If the full amount is not there by 5 p.m. this Friday, Milavier, Eleanor Davis, will be filing a civil suit against you for theft, conversion, and punitive damages, first thing Monday morning. The laughter stopped. A thick, heavy silence filled the line. I could hear his breathing. A little heavier now. Your lawyer, he stammered, the arrogance in his voice finally cracking. Don't be ridiculous. You wouldn't dare. You can't prove a thing. This was the moment. The final turn of the screw. Oh, I can prove everything, I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. And just so we're clear, this phone call is being recorded. With my full and legal consent. If you fail to meet my deadline, a copy of this recording, along with a complete report detailing the theft, will be handed over to the Columbus Police Department for criminal investigation. The silence that followed was absolute. It was no longer the silence of dismissal, it was the silence of dawning horror. I could almost picture his face, the smugness draining away, replaced by the pale, clammy look of a man who has just realized he has fundamentally miscalculated his opponent. You wouldn't, he finally whispered, his voice thin and reedy. All the bluster, all the booming authority, was gone. He sounded like a small, frightened man. Try me, I said. And I hung up the phone. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I went to work. I ate. I slept. But my entire existence was a holding pattern. A countdown clock ticking in the back of my mind. Every buzz of my phone made my heart leap into my throat. I compulsively checked my banking app every hour. There were no calls. Not from him. Not from my mother. Not from Jessica. The silence from their end was complete. And in its own way, more unnerving than their anger. Doubt began to creep in. Had I pushed too far? Was he calling my bluff? Was I about to be embroiled in a legal war with my own family that would drain my spirit and my bank account? On Friday afternoon, at 4:30, just 30 minutes before the deadline, my phone chimed with a notification. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a text. It was a simple, automated alert from my bank. My body went rigid. With a trembling finger, I opened the app. And there it was. A single, beautiful line item incoming wire transfer, $33. Wu Bei. Ling Ling. There was no memo. No apology. No explanation. Just the number. I stared at the screen for a full minute, my vision blurring. And then I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. It was a ragged, shuddering exhale of relief, of vindication, of a grief so deep I hadn't even let myself acknowledge it. It was over. I had won. But I felt no joy. There was no triumphant fist pump. No celebratory cheer. There was only a vast, quiet emptiness where my family used to be. And a powerful, urgent need to get away. I didn't waste a moment. I immediately called a top-rated real estate agent and told her I wanted to list my apartment for sale. Effective immediately. Then, I opened my work laptop and composed an email to my director in HR, formally requesting a transfer to our company's growing branch in Charlotte, North Carolina, citing a desire for new challenges and a change of scenery. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. I was done. I was cutting every single tie. A month passed in a whirlwind of packing boxes, signing paperwork, and planning my escape. The apartment sold in 2 weeks for over the asking price. My transfer was approved. The pieces of my new life were clicking into place with a speed that felt fated. As I stood in my nearly empty living room, surrounded by boxes labeled kitchen and books, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. A sense of quiet, sovereign control over my own destiny. Then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. But the area code was from Ohio. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I told myself to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, to just block the number and move on. But some masochistic curiosity made me answer. Hello. For a moment, there was only the sound of ragged, frantic breathing. Then, a voice I barely recognized, a voice torn apart by sobs, came through the line. Andrea, it was my mother. Andrea. Please, you have to come home. It's Jessica. The sound of my mother's broken sobs echoed unnervingly in the vast emptiness of my apartment. The boxes stacked against the walls seemed to absorb the sound, muffling it, making it feel both distant and intensely intimate. For a moment, I was frozen. The phone pressed hard against my ear, my mind struggling to connect this raw, unraveling sound with the woman who had sat in silent complicity just a month ago. Mom, I finally managed, my voice sounding flat and foreign to my own ears. Mom. Slow down. What's wrong? What about Jessica? She's pregnant. Andrea. Helen veiled, the words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. The baby's due in 6 months. And the father, this man she met, this artist, he's gone. Just packed up and disappeared last week. Took all of her savings with him. I sank down onto the top of a cardboard box labeled kitchen, the corner digging into my leg. I listened in silence as the rest of the sordid story poured out of her. The artist boyfriend, it turned out, was a con man. The transcendent art was a sham. The life of passion and excitement my father had so admired was built on a foundation of lies. And that was only the beginning. And your father, my mother's voice dropped to a choked whisper. He took all of our savings. Andrea. Every last penny. He invested it all in his friend's new restaurant. A sure thing. He said. A can't-miss opportunity. But the restaurant went under. It's all gone. We're going to lose the house. The bank called this morning. I closed my eyes, picturing the house. The perfectly manicured lawn, the good china, the flickering candles. A stage set for a play that had finally reached its tragic third act. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't joy. It was a profound Achingfreut. The family I had once tried so desperately to earn a place in had imploded, not because of what I did, but because of the fundamental flaws in its own foundation: pride, arrogance, and a staggering lack of judgment. We need you. Andrea, my mother pleaded, her voice now desperate, grasping. You're the only one who can help us. You're so good with money. So responsible. Alone. Just to get us back on our feet. For your sister. For your future niece or nephew. For the family. For the family? The words hung in the air between us, utterly meaningless now. I thought of the stolen money, the stolen property, the years of being treated like a utility, an obligation. I thought of my father's face, contorted with rage, as he declared my sister to be my superior in every way. The decision, when it came, was not born of anger or a thirst for revenge. It was born of a simple, unassailable truth. I listened to her cry for another long moment. I let the full weight of their desperation settle. Then, I spoke. My voice perfectly calm, perfectly even, holding no malice at all. It was the voice you would use to state a simple, observable fact, like the color of the sky. Do you remember, Mom? I asked softly. At your birthday dinner, Dad said that Jessica was better than me in every single way. He said she always has been and always will be. I'm sure someone so clearly superior will figure it out. A stunned, gasping silence was the only reply. Before she could find the words to argue, to plead, to curse me, I ended the call. My thumb then moved with a life of its own. Navigating to her contact information, I pressed block this caller. A confirmation popped up. I pressed block. The final tie was severed. The silence that filled my apartment now was no longer empty. It was peaceful. A few days later, as I was directing movers in my new, sun-drenched apartment in Charlotte, an email notification appeared on my phone. The subject line was a single, Disprettepli Andrea. Please. I'm sorry. It was from Jessica. I opened it with a sense of detached curiosity. It was a long, rambling manifesto of self-pity. It began with a half-hearted apology for everything that happened, then quickly pivoted into a detailed account of her suffering. The betrayal of her boyfriend, the stress of the pregnancy, the terror of having no money. She wrote about her shattered dreams and how unfair the world was. And then came the inevitable conclusion, a desperate plea for $5,000, just to get by, just until she could get on her feet. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a symphony of guilt and excuses. I read the entire thing, from start to finish, and I felt nothing. The old anger was gone. The hurt was a distant echo. All that was left was a faint, clinical pity. The kind you might feel for a stranger in a news story who had made a series of catastrophic life choices. Her words, once so capable of wounding me, were now just black text on a white screen. They had no power here. Not anymore. I moved my cursor over the toolbar at the top of the message. I didn't click delete. I clicked mark as spam. The email vanished from my inbox, relegated to the digital garbage heap where it belonged. And with that small, quiet click, I was finally, truly free. 6 months later, life had found a new, gentle rhythm. My apartment in Charlotte was smaller than my place in Columbus, but it was brighter, with a small balcony that overlooked a grove of pine trees. Every morning, the air smelled clean and green. I had found a new routine, a morning run through a nearby park, coffee from a local shop where the barista knew my name, and a job that was challenging and rewarding, with colleagues who respected my work, not my bank account. I had sold the old Honda Civic. For a long time, it had been a symbol of my first escape, my initial taste of independence. But it was also tied to the past, a relic of the person I used to be, the person who drove to family dinners filled with dread, the person who had to steal it back from her own father. I bought a new car. Nothing fancy, but it was mine in a way the Honda never could be. It wasn't a symbol of escaping something. It was a symbol of arriving somewhere. Sometimes, as I sat on my balcony in the warm Carolina evening, I would think about them. I didn't wonder if they were suffering. I didn't hope they were miserable. I simply didn't care. And in that indifference, I found the truest form of victory. The ultimate revenge wasn't watching them fall. It was being so content in my own life that I barely noticed they were gone. The goal had never been to burn their world to the ground. It was to build my own, on my own terms, a safe distance from their consuming fire. This afternoon, I sat on a bench in the park, a warm cup of coffee in my hands, watching dogs chase frisbees across a wide, green lawn. The sun was warm on my face. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees above. It was all so simple, so quiet, so peaceful. I was no longer Andrea. The reliable daughter. I was no longer Andrea. The family ATM. I was no longer Andrea. The invisible girl. I was just Andrea. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. I was whole. I was free. I was home.